everybody. This is the Chief Executive Summit, and we're so thrilled to have with us today Professor Gates, who's been an inspiration and really helping cross collaboration across cultures and communities. And, he and our friend Marshall Goldsmith just bumped into each other in Riyadh, where I was just with Marshall. He travels the world and really helping stitch together our framing of leadership, our concept of our ability to grow and contribute, and speaks and writes all over the world. So Professor Gates, thank you so much for being with us today.
You're absolutely welcome. It's a pleasure to be here.
So tell me, if you were to think about a few of the lessons that you wish you knew when you started out that had to do with this concept of being able to take people on the path of leadership, especially across cultures, what do you wish you knew at the beginning that you know now?
Although I'm from a mixed cultural background, my experience of different cultures was simply at home. And it
Yeah.
wasn't until I started doing business across cultures that I realized how important it is. And I would say one of the things that we can change is the way in which we communicate in order to get our messages across to people. And I hadn't really understood how important that was to begin with. Now it's my daily work, helping leaders to get the message across to people who are different from them.
When you think about the principles of communication, that sense of connection, that sense of usually common rhetoric. I mean, you were trained at Oxford in English literature, and so everyone's an actor on that stage and living within that great play of life. What are a few of the principles that you think help people do the best job of making that leap between their culture and someone else's when it comes to communication?
I think listening and observing are really important, and we don't do enough of that. Yeah, even I don't. I have to remind myself to really listen to what's going on. And if we're wanting to cross that bridge between what we want to say and the other person understanding it, try and pick up on the way in which they themselves communicate. Do they seem to be more direct? Are they more indirect? What pace do they speak at? How long do they pause while they're thinking? And it's very easy if you come in like a sort of bull in the china shop and start talking and talking when you're dealing with a culture that is more reticent about coming forward, then you can really talk yourself out of a good deal. And my very first experience doing this was in Finland, and I was negotiating with a Finnish guy, an older chap, and the Finns tend to be rather silent. Not all of them, of course, but many of them, particularly the older ones. And I went into the meeting room and started talking with him, and he wasn't making much response. He wasn't making eye contact. He was looking at his shoes. And I've since discovered, after 37 years based here, that you can tell the difference between a Finnish introvert and an extrovert. Because if you're talking to an introvert, he looks at his shoes. If he's an extrovert, he looks at your shoes. Yeah. After about 20 minutes, with very little reaction from me, I thought I'd better tell him the price. So I said, this package of training is going to cost you 100,000 Finn marks. And there was total silence. And after about 10 seconds, I cracked and I dropped the price to 95. Still silence, a terrible negotiator in those days. And I dropped it to 90,000. Finally, I said, look, my last offer is 85,000. And eventually he said, okay. Anyway, things went well and we increased the business. We were coaching people in presentation skills. I wasn't in the cross-cultural field at the time. And then one day, after the business was going pretty well, he invited me for a sauna. And we're sitting in the sauna. I said, Pekka, he was called Pekka, you're a very powerful negotiator. And he looked quite surprised. So I reminded him and he said, I wasn't negotiating. I said, well, what were you doing? He said, I was thinking. Okay, what were you thinking? He said, I was thinking that 100,000 was a very fair and reasonable offer. I said, well, why didn't you say that? He said, I just told you I was thinking. With some cultures, you don't repeat things. Others, it's important to repeat things. And I said, can you describe exactly what you were thinking? He said, well, I wanted to say I'm very interested for this proposal. And then I thought again, interested for, interested of, interested about. And before I remembered that the preposition after interested was in, you said 95,000. So I thought, I'll wait a little longer. And then when you got down to 85,000, I just felt sorry for you. So that was my sort of brutal introduction to cross-cultural communication in business.
That's brilliant. I had the opportunity to do a series with an agent in who's Scandinavian based, and I found that was generally true in the region. And I came off stage and I told my agent, I'm just really sorry. It's obvious that I bombed. I couldn't get any reaction or feedback. I'm used to being out in the audience and spinning up interest. And I mean, even when I go to Riyadh or to Muscat, we were just there. People engage with you and stand up and smile. But boy, here in Oslo, it was. I remember that first speech. It just what a disaster. And he says, "Oh, why do you feel that way?" And I said, "Well, let's ask the client. See how he's like." You were able to make the points in a engaging and brilliant fashion. And we were so delighted and thrilled, and in fact, inspired to have had you be a part of this. Okay. So much for being the communication expert. I'd say that you can't judge a book by its cover. And as you said, to be listening with great, thoughtful, active listening. What a huge difference that makes. When you think about the work that you do in the Middle East in the GCC, I just finished doing the SHRM and the ATD conferences. I'm the chief executive officer of the CEO Academy for SHRM, which is now a Wharton McKinsey combination, and we were doing seminars and so forth. Marshall was introducing his Marshall bot. What would be some of the lessons when you think about really having a deeper sense of connection for a set of communities now that are growing and leading, driving change like I've not seen anywhere else on the planet?
Well, I think the challenges are more or less just the opposite of what we get in Finland. I mean, working with a group, trying to teach them just 2 or 3 weeks ago in Riyadh, I was struck once again that my main challenge there is trying to calm people down, try to stop them speaking. Whereas if I'm working in Finland, which I don't actually do very much these days, but when I do work here, it's just the opposite. It can be like getting blood out of a stone. And I think one of the important things, if you think about leaders in that region, is that you've got to remember that there's quite a big difference between the genders. If you're teaching the women or the men. And an old Emirati once said to me, he said, the challenge with some of our younger men is that they've already got everything financially. You've got guys with a nice title on their car. They're maybe only 25 years old, but at home they've got a Lamborghini and a Maserati and a Ferrari in the garage. Yes. And so one of our biggest challenges with the younger men is motivating young leaders. With the women, it's different because their motivation is probably to be better than the men. And so they really try extremely hard. I'm not saying the men don't try hard, but I would say that trying to find things that motivate them are more of a challenge. And one thing that does motivate them, however, is the national good and thinking about the future. And about this Saudi Vision 2030. Those sorts of things inspire them if they're doing things that they know will benefit the country.
Yes, it's very rare in any human's life anywhere on the planet that you might be a part of making history rather than just living it. And that notion, I had His Excellency Chairman Sharafa in Abu Dhabi at the ATD event, and I said, you don't have to do this. It's quite obvious. Yeah. You don't have to. Why have you chosen to do this? Because interestingly, at his level, I've found them now working as hard as we ever did in Silicon Valley. The 24/7 Asian and West Asian clock, the Indians and the Far Easterners, who were part of the Silicon Valley community, we still can't not work 24/7. And meeting him, His Excellency, I felt at home. I felt these are my people. He's driven by this, and it's exactly as you said. It's a mission now. It's an opportunity to transform a society in minutes rather than millennia.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's this enormous energy there that you feel, and this optimism for the future. I think some of the West pessimism has, if we're talking culturally here, is a social construct, and we've sort of talked ourselves, maybe not as much in the US, but in the UK certainly, we've talked ourselves into, well, all we've got now is the management of decline. Uh,
Mm.
we've sort of got to clear a space for leaders to think and try and generate some of that enthusiasm and energy. And I mean, you see it in China, and China is full of paradox. For a cross culturalist, one of the things about the
Yes.
Chinese is that you have to be patient, things take a long time. Well, it may take a long time to build that initial trust, but once you've got that, and how do you get it in
Boom.
China? You get it
Boom.
yeah, eating out with them and going to their banquets, going on the trips that they organize. And once you've built that personal trust, then
Yes.
suddenly you lock into something called China speed, where
Yes.
everything has to be done immediately, and it's like a roller coaster once it's got going, but it can
Indeed.
take a while to get it started.
It makes a lot of sense. That's where you're building that as you open this notion of communication and trust.
Mm.
That's what you're building, because the work ethic and the ambition are in the DNA. And I see this also in Chennai and Mumbai and New Delhi, working with Fractal now. That's part of the engine behind some of the great artificial intelligence going on in the world. Wasn't of interest to anybody in terms of popular culture until 18 months ago. Now everybody's an AI expert. But prior to that, we were talking about data science and machine learning. These folks have known that they're building the Library of Alexandria, making it accessible and speak English and be useful and so forth. When you think about the investment that they've made in the UAE, in the Middle East, and in Saudi Arabia and the KSA, in artificial intelligence and new technologies now, on this trip, not only was I experiencing them working 24/7, they were the ones who were also saying, we are going to show the GCC and the world. We're now going to be leading in these practices because we can. We're resourced, we're focused, and as you point out, we're not cynical about what's possible.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously there's the technology, but I think it's even more important these days, almost because of what technology can do, to think of
Yes.
the human factor and human
Mhm.
skills. And for me, the underlying foundation of every successful enterprise is trust.
Yes.
But you've got to be very careful when you think about trust. Are you thinking about trust between individuals in society, or are you thinking about trust in government? And some
Mhm.
societies have very strong trust between individuals, but low trust in government. Others are the opposite. China, great trust in government. A recent survey said that something like 84% of Chinese said they trusted their government, but interpersonal trust is quite low. And then we often talk about building or creating trust, but I think even more important is to talk about earning trust. And how do
Mhm.
different cultures do that? Because there have been occasions, certainly in the West, in the US, when we've trusted too much. We
Yes.
trusted that organizations like MCI WorldCom and Enron, etc., Arthur Anderson were reliable, and then we discovered that they weren't. We
Mhm.
trusted that Volkswagen, it's a German company, would be very trustworthy. But then there was a huge breakdown in trust when they fiddled with the cars to make it look as though they weren't emitting as much
Mhm.
fumes or whatever as they were. And this was an enormous shock culturally, because you can recover relatively well from a failure in capability and competence. But if you think about character, once trust is broken there, it's very difficult to bring that back. And one of my colleagues at Oxford, Rupert Younger, has written a whole book about the difference between capability and character, and
Mhm.
about the importance of earning trust. And different cultural types do it in different ways. So when I talk about culture, I talk about linear active cultures, multi-active cultures, and reactive cultures. Linears are sort of quite process-driven. They tend to do one thing at a time. They're
Mhm.
very punctual. They are quite driven to achieve goals. Rely on facts. Multi-active cultures are more based around relations between people, and they persuade using emotion. and they talk quite a lot. Whereas reactives, which would be, say, China, Japan, Vietnam, etc., would place a lot of emphasis on listening, a lot of emphasis on saving people's face and not making people lose face, on building trust through reciprocity. And so, if you're linear, say you're German or American, then you tend to trust people who do what they say they're going to do. They keep promises. You trust people who are consistent. Politicians are often held to this. Well, you said one thing 6 months ago, and now you've said something else. How can we trust you? Sometimes it's good to change your mind when the facts change. Then multi-actives tend to build trust through building close relationships and through sharing personal stories. Whereas reactives, it's very much about reciprocity and making sacrifices. So this whole issue of trust, if you're a CEO and you're having to work across cultures, it's very important to be aware not only about the different ways in which people communicate, but how do you earn trust with the people that you're working with, and how do they earn trust in you?
It's a powerful notion to realize that the ways in which it's expressed and communicated, the through line is the humanity and necessity of trust, and the differences at which and the lengths will go to establish and keep that trust. It would seem that one of the through lines would be consistency, which is why when you have these horrible events occur, those are black swans or they're inconsistencies that threaten the whole picture. The other that I have seen in what you just described, again, is competency. That would be something else that would help build trust, is to know not only are you consistent in your behavior, and you can actually deliver. In other words, have that competency. And then the third is this communication skill, so that whatever is culturally connecting you, the rhetoric, the language, and the narratives. Could you talk a little bit about storytelling and narratology? Because you started in that world. It's part of what is your superpower today in helping cross-culturally. Tell me how we embrace that as executives.
I think it's extremely important. But again, it varies across cultures.
Yes.
And, linear cultures are maybe not quite as interested in storytelling. They're more interested in facts.
Yes.
Here are the facts.
Data. Here are the data.
Data. Some cultures are really not that interested in it. They want you to tell a good story. They want to know about you personally.
Yes.
They want to know about your reputation. I mean, I was helping a few years ago a Finnish startup to get investment in Thailand, and I put them in touch through a Thai contact of mine with the wealthiest family in Thailand who were interested in investing in their product. And they were prepared to invest 120 million euros in this new. It was a medical product which would get rid of wrinkles and scars and even heal wounds, and nothing to do with Botox, not a poison. It's like through extracting fat growth factors from humans, from the patient themselves, and then injecting it under the skin, so it would encourage the fat to grow and smooth the skin. So quite an innovative product. And in the first few meetings with the Thais, it was a real challenge because the Finns immediately went into lots of data and facts, and looked quite grim because they don't smile a lot. And smiling is seen as rather untrustworthy, which again varies across cultures. And my Thai contact after the first few meetings, he said, "Look, can you just tell them to stop with all the facts? We're not interested in the facts. Not yet. Later we will be. We want to know if we can engage with them as people. What story do they have to tell as human beings? And what's their history and their life stories? We're not so interested in the facts of this, but and can you get them to smile a bit?" The first meeting after I told my Finnish CEO of the company to smile, for about 2 seconds at the beginning of the meeting, and then immediately, because it's not easy to change. And people may ask, well, who should change? Well, my answer would usually be, well, who needs who more? And, if you're a tiny startup and you've got a $37 billion family willing to invest, well, you probably need them more than they need you. And so it's maybe a good idea for you to adapt a little bit to get your message across.
Well, that notion is, I think, is at the center of the brilliance that you offer the world, to understand who the customer is and how to touch them, not with judgment, not with a sense of preconceived notions, but actually surrendering that and substituting it with what you know and teach so well. So thank you so much for taking the time with us today to help. If you all listening to this program were to practice that insight today, come from that sense of curiosity that Professor Gates has shared with us today, I know you'd have a richer, deeper relationship and be more successful in business. So thank you again, Professor Gates. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mark, for inviting me. I enjoyed it very much.